This one's a request. Came in from a member calling himself Rich Guy Buff Dude. Right. An 80s producer, I'd say. A fella with notions. So, when he's asked for the story, he's gonna get the story. Fair's fair. Right then, Hollywood loves selling you the story of the funniest film ever made. Grand? The real story? It was a $9 million monument to pure panic, a desperate gamble by a dying system. Come here to me, and I'll tell you about the absolute hames they made of It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. It was 1963, and Hollywood was dying on its feet. The old studio system, the one that had ruled the world for 40 years, was a bloated, rotting dinosaur, and it was bleeding money from 1,000 cuts. The biggest cut, the one that was draining the life out of him, was that little box in everyone's living room, television. Why would anyone pay to go to the pictures when they could see Uncle Milty for free? The moguls, the fellas who'd built this town, were running around like headless chickens. 20th Century Fox was busy committing financial suicide over in Rome, tossing wheelbarrows full of cash onto the bonfire that was Cleopatra. The old ways were dead, audiences wanted something new. Or, at least something big. So that was the new plan. The last gamble. If you can't beat 'em, blind 'em, drown 'em in spectacle. This was the world that Stanley Kramer lived in. Now, Kramer was a fella with notions about himself. He wasn't some hack churning out B pictures. Oh no. He was Mr. Serious. He was the man who made message pictures. Important films. He'd done the defiant ones about racism. He'd done On the Beach about nuclear war. He'd done Judgment at Nuremberg about the Holocaust. Heavy, heavy stuff. And they were good pictures, sure, but Kramer was tired. He was tired of being serious. He was tired of the industry looking down its nose at him. He wanted to do something different. He wanted to make a comedy. But Stanley Kramer couldn't just make a comedy. He couldn't just film two fellas slipping on a banana peel. No, this was Stanley Kramer. If he was gonna make a comedy, he was gonna make the comedy to end all comedies. He was gonna make a comedy so big, so loud, so spectacular that it would be like a punch in the face. It would be an event. It would be a war. The plan was, well, it was a plan born of pure 60s arrogance. On paper, you couldn't fault it. First, you get a story, a simple one. A bunch of random strangers all witness a dying man's last words, revealing where he's buried $350,000 under a big W, a mad dash to find the money. Simple. Perfect. But how do you make it big? Well, first, you shoot it in the widest, most expensive format you can find, Ultra Panavision 70. Designed to be shown on a massive curved cinerama screen. This wasn't a film, it was a goddamn panorama. You couldn't just watch it, you had to be assaulted by it. And then, the cast. Ah, the cast. This was the real notion. This was the gamble. Kramer's idea wasn't just to get a few movie stars. His idea was to get every single comedian and funny person alive in 1963 and smash them all into one picture. It wasn't a cast, it was a museum exhibit. It was a vaudeville show on its last legs. Kramer and his wife supposedly spent months just driving around, knocking on doors, begging and pleading. And who did they get? Who didn't they get? The anchor, the big respectable name to hold it all together, was Spencer Tracy. Now Tracy was a legend, but he was also a very sick man. His health was shot. He was drinking himself into an early grave, and his body was just giving up. He agreed to do it, but he had a list of demands, as long as your arm. Top billing, naturally. A massive paycheck. And he would only work from 9 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon, with a long lunch. He couldn't be stressed, he couldn't be overworked. The studio's insurance company took one look at him and refused to cover him. Kramer and the studio, United Artists, had to put their own money up to insure him. If Tracy died, the whole picture went down the toilet. A grand start. And then, the lunatics. The kings of television. The very people who were killing the movie business. Milton Berle, Mr. Television, a man whose ego was so big it could be seen from space. Sid Caesar, the manic genius of your show of shows. Phil Silvers, the fast-talking Sergeant Bilko himself. And Buddy Hackett, a fella who sounded like a foghorn stuck in a bear trap. These were the new kings, and now they were coming to the big screen. But Kramer didn't stop there. Get away out of that. He got Mickey Rooney, a survivor from the old Hollywood, a fella who'd been a star since he was a child. He got Jonathan Winters, the new breed, a borderline dangerous improviser who was like a bomb waiting to go off. He got Dick Shawn. He got the gap-toothed British gent Terry Thomas. He got Peter Falk. He got Eddie Rochester Anderson. And for the women, well, this was the 60s, so the women were mostly there to scream and look worried. He got the brilliant Edie Adams, whose husband, the Brick, comedy legend Ernie Kovacs, was supposed to be in the film as Melville Crump. Kovacs died in a car crash just before filming, and Phil Silvers, one of his best friends, took the role. Kramer kept Adams in the film, a grim, sad bit of history right there on the screen. He got Dorothy Provine. And because the film wasn't already loud enough, he got Ethel Merman to play the battle axe mother-in-law. Her voice alone was a special effect. And the cameos! Stop the lights! It was an absolute circus. It was like Kramer was afraid to leave anyone out. You want the Three Stooges? Here they are, as firemen, for 2 seconds, with no lines. You want Jerry Lewis? He drives over a hat. Jack Benny? He stops his car to offer help. Buster Keaton, one of the original gods of comedy, a man who invented half the gags they were using, gets a walk-on part as a boat mechanic. It was a spectacle of, look who we got! It was Hollywood's arrogant way of saying, see, we own all these people. So that was the plan, a $9 million budget which in 1963 money was enough to choke a donkey. A cast of 50 comedy legends, all of them with egos and notions. A director famous for making people cry, not laugh. And the biggest, widest cameras ever built. A surefire, cannot fail masterpiece of comedy. I will, yeah. What could possibly go wrong? Where do you want me to start? From the first day of the shoot, this yoke wasn't a film set, it was a high-priced lunatic asylum. It was a logistical nightmare, a festival of clashing egos, and frankly a death trap. This wasn't a movie, it was a war against common sense, and the casualties started piling up early. First, Ya had the location. Kramer, in his wisdom, decided this whole mad dash should happen in the blistering heat of the California desert, Palm Springs. In the summer, the temperatures were hitting 120 degrees. The actors, most of them, let's say, of a certain age, were dropping like flies. They had nurses walking around with salt tablets and water, trying to keep these multi-million-dollar comedians from melting into a puddle. Spencer Tracy, with his dodgy health, was confined to an air-conditioned cool room between takes, huffing on an oxygen tank, while the other fellas were out frying like eggs on the pavements. And the cameras! These new Ultra Panavision cameras were the size of a small car. They were delicate, complicated bits of machinery, and they hated the desert. The heat was warping the film stock inside them. The lenses were cracking. The fine sand, the dust, it got into everything. Into the gears, into the motors. The camera crews were having nervous breakdowns just trying to get a single clean shot. They were trying to capture this grand, beautiful image, and the desert was just sitting there laughing at them. But the real devilment, the real circus, was the cast. Kramer thought he was a genius with his equal billing idea. Everyone's name, in alphabetical order. No one was the star, everyone was the star. He thought this would stop the fighting. He was an Egypt. You get this many vaudevillians and nightclub comics in one place, it's not a cast, it's a cage fight. Take Milton Berle and Buddy Hackett. Berle, Uncle Milty, was used to being the top dog. He was the king of television. He came from the old school, where Ya fought for every laugh, Ya upstaged everyone, Ya moved into their spotlight. He was trying his old tricks, trying to help the other actors with their lines, which is code for get out of my way. Hackett, who was a nightclub brawler in comics clothing, wasn't having any of it. He was a different generation. The story, and it's a good one, is that during one scene, Burley kept stepping on Hackett's lines, chin into his shot. Hackett finally just stopped, looked at Burl and said, "Milty, you do that one more time, and you're gonna be a star at Forest Lawn." There are other darker versions of that story. some involving Hackett pulling a prop, or maybe not a prop, gun on him. Pure devilment. Then you had Jonathan Winters. Winters wasn't an actor, he was a force of nature. He was an improviser from another planet. The other actors, the old school script learners, were terrified of him. He'd go on these wild manic tangents, and Kramer, to his credit, just let the cameras roll. The scene where he's meant to destroy the desert gas station, that was barely scripted. They basically just pointed Winters at a gas station and said, go. He was supposed to be in a straitjacket for one scene. He destroyed the straitjacket, just ripped it to shreds with his bare hands. They had to commission a special, reinforced one, like they'd use at a high security prison, just to keep him tied up. The man was ahead the ball, in the best possible way. And all this time, you got poor Spencer Tracy looking like death warmed over, sitting on his chair, watching these Egypts act the maggots. The rest of the cast, for all their carry-on, they loved Tracy. He was the Pope. When he was on set, they'd all quiet down, they'd hit their marks. They'd say their lines, they were on their best behaviour. Then the second Kramer yelled, "Cut!" and Tracy was shuffled off to his cool room, the circus would start right back up again. The whole production was held together by the failing health of one old man, but the egos, the heat, that was just a normal bad shoot. Where Mad World went from being a dog's dinner to a full-blown monument to Egyptry was the stunts, the 1,960 seconds arrogance, the studio system's belief that to be real it had to be dangerous. No CGI, no miniatures. If you want a car to fly off a cliff, you get a real car, a real cliff, and a real madman to drive it. The film opens with this. The crash of Smiler Grogan, played by Jimmy Durante. The stunt driver was the legendary Kerry Lofton. He had to drive this car at high speed, hit a curve, fly over the embankment, and crash. No nets, no faking it. He did it, and he walked away. Then they needed the shot of Durante, who was nearly 70 years old, rolling down the rocky hillside. They probably had a stuntman for the wide shots, but Durante, the old trooper, did more of it than he should have. But that was just the appetizer, the gas station. When Jonathan Winters and Jack Benny in his cameo are in the gas station that Winters proceeds to destroy, they didn't build a breakaway stunt station. Oh no. They bought a real working gas station in Palm Springs and just let him destroy it. Well, that's the legend. The truth is, they built two identical, fully functional gas stations right next to each other. Winters destroyed the first one and they used the shots. Then they tidied up and he destroyed the second one. With a pickaxe, and he really ripped the gas pumps out of the ground. The destruction is so complete, so chaotic, because it's real. And then, stop the lights. The plane. The scene. Where the two fellas, played by Mickey Rooney and Buddy Hackett, are in a rickety old biplane that ends up flying through a billboard. The pilot was a fella named Frank Tallman, one of the best stunt pilots in the business. The plane was a real, vintage 1930s biplane. The billboard was real, built of paper and balsa wood, but it was still a solid object. Tallman's job was to fly this antique plane at speed through the billboard. He did it. He nailed it. A perfect, terrifying shot. But that wasn't enough. Kramer needed a shot of the plane landing on the highway after, so Tallman, the pro, lands the plane on a narrow 2-lane road. And just as he's touching down, a gust of wind, a freak desert crosswind, catches the wing. It tips the plane, the wing digs into the asphalt, and the whole thing just cartwheels. It flips over, destroying the plane and shattering Frank Tallman's leg. He was in the hospital for months. His leg was so badly broken he'd have a limp for the rest of his life. And for what? For one shot. For authenticity. Pure, arrogant madness. But the one that everyone talks about. The one that proves this entire production was away with the fairies, the fire truck ladder, the climax of the film. You've got half the cast. Sid Caesar, Mickey Rooney, Buddy Hackett, Dick Shawn, all scrambling up this fire truck's extension ladder. The ladder then swings wildly out of control, flinging him around 80 feet in the air before smashing him into the side of a building and then dumping him all in a heap. That wasn't a special effect, that wasn't a rig, that was a real fire truck ladder, and it was really 80 feet in the air. The actors, the multi-million-dollar stars, were on it. They had safety harnesses, sure, thin wires that were supposedly tied to them. But the mechanism designed to swing the ladder was too powerful. It was built for swinging a ladder, not for gently rocking movie stars. The operator turned it on and the thing went berserk. It flung them around with so much force, they were just hanging on for dear life. The screams you hear in the film, those are real screams. That's not acting, that's terror. Mickey Rooney, who'd been in the business since he was a toddler and had seen it all, said he could feel the bones in his hands separating as he gripped the rung. He was furious. He climbed down what was left of him and he was ready to kill Kramer. They were all lucky to be alive. They were inches from being splattered all over the pavement. And for what? For a laugh. For the arrogance of the studio system that said, the audience needs to see it's really them. An absolute hames. Even Spencer Tracy, the one fella they were supposed to be protecting, wasn't safe. In the climax, he's holding the briefcase full of the $350,000. It's rigged by the prop department to pop open, scattering the money to the wind. How did they rig it? They filled the case with compressed air. When the special effects fella hit the button, the case exploded in Tracy's hands. It hit him with so much force in the chest, it knocked the sick elderly man clean off his feet and onto his back. Stop the lights. They almost killed their star, the man the entire film depended on for a gag. So Kramer finally finishes his 5-ring circus of death. He's got all his footage. He's got his masterpiece. He goes into the editing room and he comes out months later with his final cut. And he screens it for the studio heads at United Artists. And it is 5 hours and 20 minutes long. I'll say that again. 5 hours and 20 minutes. It was a comedy. The studio heads, who had already spent $9 million, had a collective heart attack. You can't sell a 5-hour comedy, you can only show it once a day. They told him to cut it. Kramer, acting the maggot, cut it down to 4 hours and 2 minutes. Still too long. They fought. They screamed. Finally, they reached a compromise for the roadshow premiere. The version that opened in theaters was 3 hours and 30 minutes, with an overture, an intermission, and exit music. An occupation. The film opens. It's a smash. People are flocking to see it. The spectacle worked. The arrogance paid off. But the studio, they still weren't happy. 3.5 hours. They could only get 2, maybe 3 showings in a day. They were leaving money on the table. So as soon as the big roadshow tour was over, the studio suits went into the cutting room without Kramer, and they took out their scissors. They chopped an hour out of the film. A full 60 minutes. Just gone. Character beats, setups for jokes, plot points, hacked to pieces. They butchered their own $9 million monster so they could squeeze in one more show in before bedtime. That was the final arrogance of the dying studio system. The director's arrogance to make it, and the studio's arrogance to destroy. So, what was It's a Mad, 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 Mad World? Was it the masterpiece Kramer wanted? Get a way out of that? Was it the comedy to end all comedies? Not a bit of it. It made a fortune. It was one of the biggest grossing films of 1963. It got a rake of Academy Award nominations, mostly for the technical stuff, the sound, the editing. The gamble in the short term paid off. United Artists made their money back and then some. It proved that yes, if you throw enough money in spectacle and movie stars at the public, they will show up. But what was it? It was a novelty. It was a freak show. It was a monument to pure egotree. It was the last bloated gasp of the old Hollywood dinosaurs, the go big or go home mentality that was busy sinking every other studio in town. They thought they could fight television by just making the screen wider and the stunts dumber and the noise louder. It was a war against common sense, and they were just lucky they walked away with their shirts. The film that exists today, the one you can watch, is a ghost. It's the butchered, hacked up version. The longer roadshow cut was lost for decades. The bits of film just swept off the cutting room floor and thrown in a skip. All that danger, all that money, all that ego. And the studio just tossed it in the bin. What it really was the end of an empire. The studio system was a rotten ship, and this film was the big, loud, expensive iceberg it was steering right for. It wasn't a new beginning, it was a wake. As me old fella used to say, a nod is as good as a wink to a blind horse. They were all so busy trying to make the biggest film, they never stopped to ask if they were making a good one. So now you know the real story. That's the dirt from the cutting room floor. Right, I'm off. Sláinte.